Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. And what I'll just kind of talk about today is hate versus love. And in politics, hate, fear, resentment is very powerful because people are always more scared. And you can see this in behavioral science, that people will weigh losing something more than they weigh getting something. So basically, if people had a choice where there's equal odds of making $1 as losing $1, they would make the choice that prevents them from losing the dollar. So basically, if they took the choice, so let me explain that a little bit differently. So basically, if I decided to act, there's a possibility of me making the $1 or losing $1. So since it's an equal odd of the good of the same amount, psychologically, we're going to weigh losing that $1 higher than making the $1. So in that case, we'll choose not to do that thing. Okay, so in that case, in order for me to choose to do that thing, to take that risk of losing $1, the reward, if I'm right, has to be much greater. So I'd have to make $5 to feel comfortable risking losing $1. So there's this sort of higher weight we put on loss over reward. And that's just something that we do. Something that's sort of biologically wired in us for whatever reason. That shows up in a lot of different behavioral science studies. So what's the takeaway? When it comes to politics, this translates into it's much easier to run a campaign where you communicate to people the potential of what they would lose if the other person wins. So basically what you're saying is that, hey, you know what? If that other team wins, you're going to lose X, Y, and Z. But when you feel that the other team is going to take stuff from you, what's that going to do? It creates hate. It creates resentment. It creates anger because you're feeling like you're losing something because of the existence of this other group. They're just trying to get you to vote for them. But what they're doing is they're teaching you to hate. And this creates polarization. And people wonder why, we live in such polarized political times. I mean, on top of it, you also have the fact that we are not in the best of economic times per se. We're just kind of anecdotally in the US, basically you're seeing a situation where you can make a lot of money, you can do really well for yourself, but it requires a high level of specialization, which means you need to have more training, more human capital than ever before. Human capital plays a much larger role than necessarily physical capital. You don't need large amounts of land to be successful. But what you do need is large amounts of human capital. So back in the day, it was a little bit different, okay? Someone just needed to build a factory, and the labor didn't have to have much human capital to be able to provide additional value to that factory. They just needed hands. Now we need people who are really skilled programmers, and not just able to program, but able to program in the newest methods, using the newest library sets, using the newest programming languages, on the newest platforms that are constantly changing very quickly. So not only do you have to spend a lot of time specializing, but the specialization you do take on oftentimes can be very short-lived. So you have to constantly be learning. So we live in a very in a place where hyper specialization is kind of really a thing. And hyper specialization takes on a lot of risk, of course. So this creates an interesting situation where, and then the problem is you have an education system that oftentimes can inhibit people from hyper specializing, whether it's just sort of the bad governance in public school systems. Well, you have some quality public schools. Oftentimes they're in areas that would have been able to afford the education anyways. And the areas where theoretically you feel like the need for public schools would be in the greatest, the poorest areas, is where they have the poorest public schools. The ones that don't function well, the ones that really don't get the job done for a variety of different reasons. Some of it's bureaucracy, some of it is, you don't have parents who are active sometimes because either they're working around the clock to put food on the table, or they're just absent in general. There are rough areas where people are much more concerned about maybe surviving instead of, passing a class. There's a variety of reasons why these areas may not necessarily have the right education outcome. So you have that level of stuff where that will prevent some kids to get to sort of that higher learning level where they specialize. But then a lot of times when people get to that higher learning level, meaning they go to college, because of the subsidies of student loans and whatnot, and a lot of the things that would sort of govern people's decision makings at that point in their life, people oftentimes don't necessarily specialize as often in in-demand areas, and then go in so much debt that once they realize what they've done, there's no going back. They just got to focus on figuring out how they're going to pay off this student loan, instead of going back and like, oh man, I should have taken on a different skill. Let me go back and try again. So you just kind of have this situation where you have a bunch of people who basically, if you have the foresight to specialize, you're lucky. And I mean, it's not, I hate to use the word lucky because it's not random. It's not, but I think you get what I mean. Basically, what happens, a lot of bad policies just create a situation with a lot of bad incentives. So when you have a tough economic times, people are much more sensitive to looking for someone to blame, someone to kind of accuse of their sense of loss or the sense of lacking. And it's much easier to blame other people. Okay, it's much easier to blame actual people instead of blaming sort of something abstract like policy or whatnot. So this creates hate. But a message of love is much more powerful in actual sort of practical world. I mean, basically, when you promote a message of which is what the libertarian message is a message of saying, you know what, we should respect and care about each other enough to let each other live our lives, to let each other, be able to enter consensual arrangements in our businesses, in our economic lives, and enter consensual arrangements in our social lives. Okay, and not think that each other's lives are something that we are allowed to control to achieve whatever dream I have of the way the world should be. That basically other people other than me are merely a means to an end, not an end to themselves. In libertarianism, the individual is the ends. You are the ends. You are the reason you are alive. You are alive to just live the best life you can. Okay? And if you live the best life you can, it's going to benefit you and the people around you. And if those people live the best lives, those circles of socialness are good. And also, when people are able to tolerate each other enough to be free, if we're not promoting hate and resentment enough so that way people can forgive each other when they make mistakes, can tolerate each other's actions, can embrace each other, you'll have a world that'll have much more economies of scale, much more free exchange of ideas, that'll create the innovations, they create the job opportunities, that'll create overall a better world. But on top of it, you won't necessarily, it's not just polarization, but it's also sort of an isolation that goes in society. When government does provide more, then what happens is you're able to function in society without having to be part of it, in a sense. When absent government providing you with X, Y, and Z, generally you have to provide for it for yourself, or someone has to provide it for you, which means you have to have a good relationship with your family, or form a family of some sort, in a sense. Like, family doesn't necessarily have to be the people the group of people you're born into, but people you find that care about you. You have an incentive to find people who care about you and to care about others, because you need that reciprocity to survive. So ironically, the more free you are to do to be an individual, the more incentive we have to create community, because the more we need each other when there isn't someone who's just automatically going to provide X, Y, and Z. So our own individual socialness becomes much more of an imperative, much more of a need. Now, sort of people's hang-ups on this is because they're scared that this is going to create certain barriers, in the sense, well, I'm not going to be able to be 100% myself because society might turn its back on me. But again, it comes down to the people who love you, and if we all sort of try to foster that world where we all let each other just sort of live life, we can all let each other be free and allow there to be the sort of communal development that exists. Because again, you replace that with other institutions, you're just going to create a more divided society. And then on top of it, the costs of providing that's going to be less efficient, which means you're going to have to extract more societies from society, meaning more taxation, which means people are going to have to work longer hours to keep the same amount of income afterwards, which means they're going to be less able to participate in society because they're spending all their time working and not spending time with their family and their community and their friends, which just makes society even more isolated. And then just makes the financial stress, which makes people more receptive to the messages of hate, resentment, and anger. This just creates this sort of cycle that just tears society at its limbs until society and civilization falls apart. freedom allows civilization to build. It allows community to build. It allows love to thrive, because love becomes part of how you survive. If people don't care about you, it's hard to survive. If you don't care about people, people are less likely to care about you. So when people are free, love becomes not just a extracurricular thing, but part of your everyday survival life. And that's a good thing, because we want a more loving society. We want more people to have the incentive to love each other and care for each other, not less. So this is all I really want to talk about for a moment. My name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Super uber libertarian guy from wherever. And if you guys like what I have to say, check out alexmerced.com, check out libertarian101.com, and do consider joining the Libertarian Party so we can get this message out there, express this message of how free people can love each other, can be more together, build community, and how when we get away from that, all those good things fall apart. So have a great day and enjoy.